Hello everybody, it's Eziomonte117 here, and today we are going to do a different kind of review, and this time it's not going to be a Prague review. Today I'm going to do a similar to what I'm going to do with the Rush album. I'm going to do a marathon, and this time I'm going to do a marathon on the band Ghost. Ghost is one of the most controversial bands that's ever come out of music in recent memory. And why is that? That's because the band itself is relatively unique when talking about metal and metal today. Metal today is mostly just consisting of either metalcore bands that are trying to be overly technical and have no idea what the word progressive means, or they're just playing chugging riffs and are just screaming into the mic as much as they can. And with Ghost, they don't have any of those features, and they go back to when metal was a lot more creative and not as hard hitting, which is why the sound of this band is a lot more 70s inspired than, let's say, today's metal. And most people seem to like that direction that this band decided to go with their music, and some people thought that it was absolute trash. In my opinion, I think this band is a tiny bit overrated. Whoa, okay. Before you guys put up your pitchforks and crucify me, I'm not saying that this band is bad at all, because they're not. Because they have definitely put out some really, really strong songs, but for the most part, this band kind of just feels vapid and mostly just kind of lame. Like, and I mean by lame is just that they're trying to do this gimmick, and the gimmick is that they are basically just a 70s band in today's music. Like, if you heard this, like, seriously, you could have easily have put Ghost's music in, like, Blue Oyster Cult album, for example, because Blue Oyster Cult is one of their inspirations, and you wouldn't notice. Like this band is literally Blue Oyster Cult or Merciful Fate of the new generation. And like I said, a lot of their music is pretty good, and I really enjoy it, but overall, I do think this band is a tiny bit overhyped, and I think that most of their music is kind of uninspired and generally uninteresting. So in honor of the new album that Ghost has released not so long ago, Prequel, we're going to go through their discography and see how their albums that came before hold up. And let's see and see how they started with their first album and how they are now. And the first album that we're going to talk about, or just their debut album, is called Opus Eponymous. When this album came out, metal was just kind of boring and stale. It was mostly just like I said earlier, it was mostly just metalcore bands or bands that are trying to replicate Metallica or whatever. It was a lot of Avenged Sevenfold during the time this album came out. But when Opus Eponymous came out and people had to listen to it, people didn't know what to say, because the album was so different. It definitely isn't original, but because as I said, a lot of the influences of 70s bands like Black Sabbath and Blue Oyster Cult are definitely present. As I said, but what made this album so unique was just that we haven't had that many albums recently that feel like that feels like 70s metal all the way through, or at least not to this degree. And what do I think of Opus Eponymous? I think it's absolutely fantastic. And by fantastic, I mean that it's probably the best album the band has made. It still has flaws, and it isn't a perfect album, but it's probably the band's most consistent and best effort. And let's take a look at why this album is so good. The album starts with this little organ intro called Deus Culpa. It's nothing too big, but it's just supposed to be a little segue, which leads into Conclavi Con Dio, the real opener of this album, and the intro to this track is fantastic. The bass work, as well as the build-up with the heavy riffs, as well as the drums, is really epic. As well, and it is, and also add to the fact that. Also add with the vocalist saying Lucifer. It is a really epic opening, and it's kind of sad that the rest of the song kind of falls flat. After the rather cool intro, most of the song is just kind of boring, and there isn't a whole lot going on. Even the chorus, which should be cool since it has Gregorian chants, and it definitely sounds really. It definitely sounds really satanic because this band definitely focuses on a lot of satanic themes. But even the chorus is just kind of there. The song itself isn't awful, but it's definitely one of the weaker tracks on the album. The album really starts to get going though with Ritual, probably some of the best songs the band has ever made. Has a really rock-like intro, as the guitars themselves aren't nearly as heavy as on the last song, but that completely changes as soon as you get to the main verse. And if you hear the main riff, you might be thinking to yourself, isn't that the same riff that Megadeth used for Symphony of Destruction? It is, sort of, kind of, but I'm not going to address that here because Megadeth and Ghost are completely different bands, so, yeah. The verses themselves are really haunting and really do add a really spooky atmosphere to the entire thing. But the chorus itself is really poppy, and I like it. The chorus is probably the best chorus the band has ever made. It's so infectious. At the chapel of Ritual, smells like dead human sacrifice from the altar bed. Like it just gets in your head instantly. I also like that little breakdown with this devilish voice quoting the Bible. It's small details like that makes this song really memorable. This is definitely one of the best tracks on the album. Then you go straight into Elizabeth, which is I don't know. I'm not such a huge fan of the song, but there's good moments on here. The opening riff is a bit weird as everything feels really compressed. Like when the main riff starts, the drums are really loud, the bass is really loud. It kind of sounds like a clusterfuck. It just kind of becomes a bit distracting. But and the verses themselves are rather weird as well, as the main vocalist is trying to be really haunting and really spooky, just like the last song. But here he does a lot of these weird high-pitched voices and after ending each sentence, which is really distracting. The main chorus itself is also kind of annoying. It's really high-pitched, and yeah, the vocals on this track are not that amazing. But musically, this song is really good, though, and it's definitely really catchy, but overall, this track is one of the weaker tracks on here. Then we get to my personal favorite track on this album with Stand By Him. The opening riff itself sounds really familiar to Elizabeth, but that's kind of the only similarity I would make there. The verses themselves are a lot more haunting than the two tracks before. The chorus is really catchy. I really like the instrumentation. It's just a fantastic track and definitely my favorite song on here. Then we get another amazing track with Satan Prayer. It has this really cool intro with this chugging riff and a lot of like synthesizer effects. And then it goes straight into this another haunting verse, which isn't as strong as the last track, but it still works. The chorus is really good, and the overall atmosphere is pretty strong. Definitely another highlight on here. Then we get another amazing song with Death Knell. Well, it's not the darkest song on there. I will get to the darkest song on here later. It is definitely the most atmospheric. It starts out with a sound sample of some raindrops, which goes straight into this really cool drum pattern that isn't necessarily complex, but it definitely adds to the atmosphere. There's some weird vocal deliveries, and the chorus itself isn't quite as strong as the last two tracks, but I do really think it's catchy, and again, it's really spooky. Definitely a really good song. Then we get to arguably the weakest track on this album with Prime Mover. Not the song by Rush, but the song by Ghost. And this is definitely the darkest song musically. And this song starts off with some promise as we get this really cool intro again with some really good bass and drums, and probably isn't the best riffs on this album, but the rest of the song is so boring. The chorus is probably the worst one on there. It's even worse than Con Clave Con Dio. The vocals are pretty unappealing, and it just kind of drags on. I don't have a whole lot to say about this track. It's just kind of boring. The album ends on a high note with Genesis, an instrumental track that's probably the most beautiful on here. Starts with some synth noises, which goes straight into some beautiful guitar riffs and guitar solos, and it's such a upbeat closer. I mean, especially because a lot of this album has been really dark and heavy, and despite the poppy choruses, most of the lyrical content here has been rather grim. So it's nice that they managed to end the song that is mostly just upbeat instrumentals. It isn't quite as good as Miasma from Prequel, but it is a great instrumental and definitely a great closer. So what do I think of this album? It's definitely a great debut album from these guys, and while it's my favorite album from these guys, it isn't perfect, and the flaws on here are definitely major. That's the biggest problem I have with this album, which I didn't even bring up that much when talking about the songs, is the vocals. The vocals in this album are really unappealing, and they try it. Sometimes it works with the spooky atmosphere, like in Satan Prayer and Stand By Him, but most of the time the vocals just come off as rather annoying, and it doesn't really quite fit the tone. That these songs are trying to show. And another thing I'm not the biggest fan of is the production. I know they were trying to create this 70s aesthetic, which explains why the album is 36 minutes long. It's trying to be like Black Sabbath's Masters of Reality, but I don't know. There's a lot of the guitars do sound a bit muffled at parts. It's kind of weird because the drums and bass sound great, but the guitars for some reason don't have that punch to them that they should have. And there's a lot of compression at times, and the vocals sound pretty bored. And there's a few weak spots. That's a Prime Mover is probably the only song on there I can say is just terrible. It's not a terrible. Okay, I'll tell you that. It's not a terrible song, but it's definitely the weakest song on here. And there's some moments on Con Clave Con Dio and Elizabeth that are sort of weak, like the chorus on Con Clave Con Dio and the vocals in Elizabeth. But for the most part, this album is solid and really fun, and it's definitely worth the 36 minutes that it lasts. So yeah, that's what I have to say, and I hope you stay tuned for the next review. Peace.